Hey there, welcome to this week's edition of Midweek Morning Encouragement. My name's Anthony. I'm one of the pastors here at Keystone Bible Church, and this morning I just want to encourage all of us about what it means to really follow Jesus with our lives. When you read the Bible, you start to see that it calls followers of Jesus a number of different names. In some places it calls us children of God. Other places it calls us citizens of heaven. We're called ambassadors for Christ. We're called branches. He's the vine, John 15. We're called joint heirs and a bunch of other titles as well. And all of these, when you put them all together, they help us understand better what it means to be a Christian. But there's one title that's used almost 40 times in the New Testament to refer to Christians. And it's more than any other title. And it's the title Dolos, which means slave. Like the prevailing description of a Christian's life is the imagery of a slave relating to his master. The problem is, oftentimes in Scripture, we won't read that word doulos translated as slave. We'll read it as servant. Going back to the KJV and to the Geneva Bible, which predated it, that word doulos in Greek was often translated as servant or bondservant. And the reason that it was softened was to avoid the negative connotations and cruelty that surrounded the transatlantic slave trade from Europe into the Americas. Because that's what most people think of when they hear the term slave. And so translators, they chose to translate it a little more softly to servant or bond servant. Now, it's not a secret to know that in the Greek language, it has Greek words for servants, and the word doulos is not one of those words. And so you should know that the jobs of servants and slaves, they overlap a little bit, but there is one major distinction. And here it is. Servants are hired, slaves are purchased. Servants have a measure of personal freedom and rights about choosing who they want to work for and what they would do. Slaves don't have any freedom. They don't have any personal rights. If you're a doulos, then you're a possession. And so when you read Paul call himself and Timothy slaves of Jesus in Philippians 1:1, or Jude call himself a slave of Jesus in Jude verse 1, or John, he calls himself and all believers slaves in Revelation 1:1. And Peter, he calls himself a slave in 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 1. When we read that, there is a gravity of that term applied to me and you that should really cause some serious evaluation to take place in our heart. It should offend us in our sensitivities. It should confront the misconceptions that we have about what it means to follow Jesus. Like our culture, it's just always telling us that we have an option to obey Jesus. Like, I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes I think I can negotiate with Jesus over the terms and conditions of his call on my life. That we can argue with him about the inconveniences of his commands, or complain that his blessings, they came just a little bit too late. Or, hey Jesus, this wasn't exactly how I pictured my life going when I chose to follow you. The problem is that we think we've been hired by God instead of purchased by his blood. The Bible, it redefines freedom for us. It turns everything upside down. And it sounds restrictive to be called a slave, but it's only when we become slaves of Jesus that we're not slaves of everything else, and we can finally experience true freedom. Let me show you how we typically think about the Christian life. It's like this sheet of paper. We typically, following Jesus typically goes something like this. Okay, God, I'm going to follow you, but let's add a couple of bullet points and a couple of stipulations. I'm going to worship you as long as there's no suffering or no pain. No hard stuff, God, okay? I'm going to follow you, and I'll meditate on your love, and I'll have quiet times, but you just got to give me ... Or okay, God, I'm going to love people because you call me to, but just as long as they're not too difficult. And so it's after we have all our bullet points on the contract, that's when we find the place to sign that we'll sign our name. That's typically what American Christianity looks like today. And this is some of the Christianity that I see in my own heart as well. It's the I've been hired, not bought type of Christianity. But let me show you what true biblical blood-bought slave Christianity looks like. here's a blank piece of paper. You take the blank piece of paper without any terms, without any conditions, without any bullet points, and you find the dotted line at the bottom and you sign your name. And then you let Jesus, as the master and Lord of your life, write any terms, any conditions, any circumstances, any bullet points that he wants. You let him write the rest of the contract. Why? Because he purchased us with his own blood. He laid his life down so that we could live. Today and for the rest of the week, I want to encourage you to be a Christian who knows you're owned by Jesus. You've been bought with his blood. You are his slave and he is your master. And the best part about all this is that he's good. I hope that encourages you. Join us next week right here, same time, maybe a different location for next week edition of Midweek Morning Encouragement.